I think it's a great shame that the job of Foreign Secretary is now being used as a consolation prize for whoever isn't the chancellor.
Oh, that's interesting. Is that how that's how you think it will be perceived?
I think that's absolutely what has happened in this case.
Every government, there are always questions about where the money comes from. He's not been helped, though, this morning, has he, Andy Burnham, by Darren Jones, who was, just up until yesterday, responsible for this digital ID policy. He's come out and said publicly, well, it was never funded, so you're going to have to find the money in the budget.
Yeah, that's a bit of a kick from Darren Jones, and I think he gets one of those, and then he needs to go and have a nice long summer and relax a bit, because it's really unhelpful for anybody who wants this Labour government to be a success. And I think there are an awful lot of people who really do, knowing what the alternative to that is. The reality is the OBR had told us that this was unfunded to the extent that it had to be met from departmental savings elsewhere within government. The facts of that remain the same. But look, Paul Johnson was right when you had that quote from him a second ago from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. If you were looking to fix the energy market, if you were looking for long-term solutions and how to bring bills down, you wouldn't start here. But that's not the point of this policy, Kate. The point of this policy on day one of a new Labour government is to say to the country, I get it, I'm on your side. It's symbolic, it's values-led. The first thing he does is talk about homelessness. The second thing he does is make one move, an early move, on how to reduce the cost of energy bills. That will resonate with working people across the country, and that's why he's done it.
So it's interesting. So you what you're seeing, in your view, from Andy Burnham is a feeling, is trying to foster a feeling among the public about what he's here to do. It's less important the detail.
Absolutely. Look, you get one shot at first impressions, and for many people who aren't the political geeks that we are, they're just tuning in to who this new Prime Minister is and what he's going to do. So I think it's actually pretty brilliant comm strategy to have really simple messages to say, you don't like digital ID cards, I'm going to scrap them. The money I was going to spend on that, I'm going to use to cut your bills. It's simple, it's clear, it'll be well understood, and that's why he's done it.
So, William, does it matter that the money doesn't stack up, or is the messaging overall more important?
Well, it does matter. Kezia is quite right that's why Andy Burnham has announced this. It creates a feeling, it shows a value, it's an illustration of what he wants to do politically. That's all. I'm sure that's absolutely correct. The problem is you can't do that many times. You can't create many warm feelings if the numbers don't actually add up. There are only so many £1.8 billion you can announce when the money isn't there. After a few days, you start to have a real problem. So that is a problem in this case. Darren Jones might be unhelpful, but he has pointed out the truth that the money for digital ID cards wasn't actually allocated. So this is another unfunded. It's like part of that defence investment plan. The money for it doesn't actually exist at the moment. But it's meant to create a feeling. It's not necessarily, in my view, the most brilliantly chosen policy. A lot of the benefit of cutting VAT on energy goes to goes to larger households, actually. So it'll be interesting to see how that works in terms of who gets the benefit of that. So it's a bit of a political stunt at the beginning, and you can only pull so many of those without really having the money.
Well, I mean, and Kezia, I suppose one of the things that we are starting to see from Andy Burnham is a number of quite significant financial commitments. You know, he's talking about social care being free at the point of use. That could run to £10 billion. Reasonably conservative estimate, could be much, much higher than that. You've got other things like a rent freeze in the longer term. You've got bus fare freezes. You've got changes to the personal allowance. There are lots and lots of policies stacking up already which tot up quite quickly. Where does the money come from for those?
From a very good chancellor, which is what he's picked this morning in the form of John Healey, who is, of course, well schooled in the art of how the Treasury works. This is a guy that did his apprenticeship under Gordon Brown, who shaped the modern Treasury as we know it. So, look, there is going to be some sort of sleight of hand when it comes to tax policy. There's no doubt about that. He is going to be in the business of revenue raising. The question is, how do you do that without damaging economic growth? There's an awful lot of detail to come. But I think what we have in the form of Andy Burnham is somebody who believes in using the power of the state to intervene for equity and equality and to lift people out of the circumstances that they find themselves in. That's the mindset, that's the theory of government, and the detail flows from that. But it is day one, Kate, and there's an awful lot of information and detail to come. But I think what we know from John Healey is that there's somebody there who's got a big picture idea of what the state should look like, what public money should be used for, and who it should be spent on. And I find that really encouraging.
I don't want to be pious about this, but a couple of people raised this point, Kezia. I think I should put it to you. Isn't truth important on day one? He's come in and he said, I'll do things differently, I'm honest, Andy, you can trust me. And the first thing he's done is announced the policy and the funding is not true. He's basically said, I'm going to fund this by spending £1.8 billion that was allocated over here, I'm going to move it over there. We know that's not true. We knew it was untrue before he said it, we knew it's untrue after he said it. So does not the detail matter on this? Is it me just being sort of pious and naive, or actually, did he not have a chance to be honest and upfront with the British people? And he's had one test of that, not a particularly big test, not an important policy, not going to make any difference to anyone's lives, really, £3.75 a month, and he's failed it. Is that not a problem?
No, I disagree with that, and there's two things really on that. The first one is not to hark back to Darren Jones and give him more air on his free kick at the government he's supposed to support this morning, but that was quite an astonishing revelation for somebody who was pretty much in charge of that budget line until he decided it wasn't unfunded, it wasn't funded properly. So I find if there's any guilt around telling the truth to the public, it should fall on the last government for saying they were going to do something that they had no money for. But I believe the money is there because the intent, the line being drawn was within departmental savings that were going to be made elsewhere in government. Those savings are still going to have to be found in order to deliver on this VAT cut, because that VAT cut is going to happen. To your broader point, Stig, look, the reality here is the thing you're asking for is the thing that Keir Starmer did in the early days of the Labour government, which is turn up and say, look, it's all incredibly difficult, the money's a total mess, things are going to get worse before they get better. And that led to rack and ruin for his government. What Andy Burnham is promising is a sense of hope and optimism and a bit of belief that things can get better. If you're going to cement that belief beyond your own people and into the country, you have to lead with your values from the off. So you do things like say, I don't want to live in a country where people sleep on the streets each day. I don't want to live in a country where people can't afford to pay their energy bills. So here's two things I'm going to do off the bat to make a difference to that. And people can then understand what type of Prime Minister they've got and what he's going to do. I'm not suggesting for a second this is going to be easy. There are huge problems ahead. Of course there are. But why bring them forward? Why depress people on day one when there are things that we can do in this incredibly wealthy country to rebalance the stakes just a little bit for people who need that help now?
I think it's worth, shall I read out the line in the press release so that we are all clear how this was sold this morning. This is the press release that was out at 6 o'clock this morning about the funding, and it's in the fourth paragraph. So it says, full quote, "The cost of this immediate action for this financial year taken now before the next price cap is being funded from the cancellation of the brackets 1.8 billion digital ID programme." And it goes on later on to say that the money would have been allocated to the programme and will now be allocated, reprioritised and redirected towards this measure by savings which were due to be identified from within existing budgets. So, but that's an immediate measure. So I suppose the question you've got to ask is how will you immediately find that money, because you're going to do it quite quickly. So you've got to find savings that are going to deliver that cash. And it's about £850 million they need to find.
And actually our listeners are a bit split, because there's a kind of, you're being all gloomy and doomy, you know, give Kezia's point of view. This is Vibenomics. This is a chance to sort of set out a direction of travel, to people saying, well, actually, this is the problem that all governments have got themselves into, not quite telling the truth, or the full truth, certainly. William, the other area we could look at, another policy that's coming along the way, adult social care. Hugely expensive, hugely necessary, hugely ducked by every single Prime Minister of every stripe for pretty much 2 decades. Boris Johnson had a go at it, nearly got there and then backed off. Is this another good example of Burnham reflecting on no more than God's honest truth? We have a huge problem here, we've got to find a way of funding it, or flying a kite that he can't really pay for in the end?
Well, I think it's a bit of both, unfortunately. This is an enormous problem, and he's quite right about that. And yes, no other prime minister has solved it. In fact, Theresa May came up with a bold policy in the 2017 election, and that probably cost her majority in the 2017 election. So it's very politically perilous when you come to how are you actually going to pay for social care. He seems to want to do it on an NHS type model. So presumably that involves a lot more money again. So it's back to the same theme, really. There's a lot of what he said in the on becoming prime minister in the days before and then yesterday that does involve, if you really took it literally, spending a lot more money, and he hasn't got the money unless there's a big rise in taxes or a crisis in the bond market. So I think there are quite a lot of hostages to fortune, really, in Andy Burnham's opening statements. And I completely agree that he's trying to create the right values and priorities that as he sees it for his government. But it won't be many weeks before the financial reality starts to bite on all of these things.
And does that mean, Kezia, a social care levy is necessary? I mean, Boris Johnson put 1.25 percentage points on national insurance and then cancel it soon after. Is that the world we're living in, where actually we all have to front up to ourselves and say, we have to care about this stuff? We had Andrew Dillon on making this point. We've got to care about this stuff. We've got to pay for it. And we're willing to pay more somewhere to do that.
So look, you're right to say that many a Prime Minister has run towards this problem and then run away from it again. There was a Health Secretary that tried to tackle this too, and it was somebody called Andy Burnham in the latter days of the last Labour government. I remember it well. And the reason that didn't work was because the Tories very cleverly, in a very clear communication style, branded it the death tax, and it suffered greatly in the 2010 general election, as I remember it. And then, of course, Labour turned the dial on that and started attacking the Tories and the government after that for trying to do something similar in the same agenda.
Yeah, the dementia tax, they called it that time.
Yeah, so we've been back and forth around this a few times. It is an issue where significant reform is required. I think it's important when we say that we're going for an NHS model, what we mean by that. So what we're talking about is making sure that people who work in social care workers, get proper salaried jobs and proper terms and conditions like NHS staff, and that their wages go up in line with NHS staff. So you've got that equity within the system that treats people who work in care homes just as they would as if they were in hospital, and that will produce better care for people. That is expensive, of course it is, and it should be, because we should pay people who look after vulnerable people well for the very difficult job that they do. But there are also huge savings to make here as well, because we pay inordinate amounts of money for a social care system that is failing just now, because every time somebody slips at home who isn't properly cared for and ends up in an A&E department and spends months and months in hospital when they didn't really need to be there, it's costing the public purse a huge amount of money and creating huge problems around delayed discharge. So yes, this is one of these preventative policies that Andy Burnham's talking to, where you can spend to save, and in time we will see the material benefits of that if it's done well.
But I suppose you still have to have the money to spend to save it. It would be a bit like me saying it would be great for me to put solar panels on my house, but I haven't got the money I need to put the solar panels on. So ultimately I can't do it until I have, and that's, I suppose, part of the problem here. Shall we talk about some of the personalities? Because we've had a run through already. We've talked a little bit about Ed Miliband as Foreign Secretary. Incidentally, it seems the press in America have discovered the bacon sandwich picture of Ed Miliband. That's already plastered on the American press this morning. He's spoken to Donald Trump as Andy Burnham. That seems to have gone pretty well. What do you make of these appointments, William? I mean, you know the foreign brief pretty well. What will Ed Miliband be facing? Is he a good appointment?
Well, he's a senior politician. He's entirely able to get his mind around foreign policy. He unfortunately, and we've discussed this, he's the 10th one now since me. So a lot of the rest of the world just isn't taking this seriously anymore. What's the point of meeting the latest foreign secretary? Because there's another one along every year. So I hope now that he's there, that as long as Andy Burnham's there, Ed Miliband's going to be there. But so there's some stability in that. But of course, it's a very difficult brief at the moment. Donald Trump is wading further into the quagmire in Iran. The war between Ukraine and Russia is actually escalating. There are a lot of tensions in the South China Sea. There's all the questions of relations with Europe. Trump administration is difficult on a daily basis to deal with. We've just announced 50% tariffs on Canada overnight. So he's going to have a lot to do, but I think it's a great shame that the job of Foreign Secretary is now being used as a consolation prize for whoever isn't the chancellor.
Oh, that's interesting. Is that how you? That's how you think it will be perceived?
I think that's absolutely what has happened in this case. Sorry, Ed, you can't be the Chancellor of the Exchequer because it would unsettle the markets, and a lot of people are against it. So you can be Foreign Secretary, where you can go off around the world and not trouble anybody too much at home.
Well, they did that with Boris Johnson, didn't they, as well?
Yes, exactly. And it's better to have somebody who really wants to be the Foreign Secretary. That was the basis on which I did. Actually, that's what David Lammy was doing, but he got sidetracked he was rapidly reshuffled and has now been dismissed from the government altogether. So I wish him well. He's a very clever and capable guy, but this job is rotating, like a lot of the jobs, far too quickly. And it's another issue with the cabinet that was just put together last night, that some of them were moved unnecessarily, who were doing a reasonable job, and now they're out.
Who do you think that applies to, William?
Well, we talked about it before, but on this job, Yvette Cooper, for instance. And so, of course, now I'm struggling to think of all the others who were doing a reasonable job.
The Defence Secretary maybe be replaced by Wes Streeting.
Well, the Defence, that is another example. That is another example, actually. And he's only had 6 weeks in that job, and now there is another one. And okay, he's a senior politician. He will probably do a good job, but since like in any job in life, it takes about 6 months to work out what you're doing. And if you rotate everybody at this speed, the ministers never really get on top of their departments, and you don't have effect. However many announcements you make on the steps of Downing Street, you don't get the follow through when it comes down to the departments and the secretaries of state.
Yeah. Kezia, there are lots and lots of other appointments, maybe smaller ones that we haven't looked at in so much detail. Nick Thomas-Symonds, for example, has been moved out of his position negotiating with the European Union. I wonder what we ought to make of that, because it's been seen as pretty successful. Chris Bryant, I think, is the new Northern Ireland Secretary, so there's some moves around the edges. But I wanted to ask you about Lou Hague, who's back in a very, very central position, right next to Andy Burnham in number 10, really. And also Angela Rayner. Now, both of them they left government previously because of controversies. Lou Hague because of a fraud conviction over a mobile phone, and Angela Rayner over a tax bill, which has now been sorted but lost her job. Is that a bit of a risk, do you think, those appointments for Andy Burnham?
No, I don't think so. I think they've both sort of served their time on the bench for past omissions, and both are in exactly the roles that they should be in. Particularly pleased to see Angela Rayner, who probably could have had the pick of the jobs that she wanted, to be honest, back as Housing Secretary, and I think that's exactly the job that she wanted. And that for me is really exciting, not just because of what's been said around ending rough sleeping, but because Andy Burnham has also committed himself to the biggest council house building programme since the Second World War. Now, that's exciting to me because when it comes to tackling structural inequality, one of the ways that you need to do that is to reduce the housing costs of people in this country. And this is a really big ticket, long-term plan to readdress that balance. And that's exactly what Angela Rayner's all about. And if somebody's going to make it happen, it will be her. When it comes to Louise Hague, look, this is basically Andy Burnham's ops manager, right? It's somebody on his right flank who can go out there and make sure that all the things he wants to happen happens. She's been the architect, really, of the path that's taken him to the door of number 10. It's quite right that she follows through it with him. And
I guess the moral question, which some of our listeners are asking, William, is, should you be putting someone who's a convicted fraudster? Now, you might have a view on the seriousness of the offence. She got a conditional discharge, but it is a conviction for fraud. Should a convicted fraudster be the most powerful woman in the British government? Because that's where we've got to.
I think that, personally, I feel that issue has now happened and been dealt with. I'm not, as you can gather, I'm not a huge fan of the new cabinet. Indeed, of course, I think there should be an entirely conservative cabinet. So none of them should be there. But I don't think that will be I think that issue has now passed on Louise Hague. So what is important is how she actually performs in this government. Is she that effective right-hand person for Andy Burnham or not? That should really be the test, rather than controversies in the past, I think.
We've done a lot of what's going on for the new government. We do want to ask you how it feels. When we think about Rachel Reeves in particular, how you've gone from being this significant player in the nation's affairs with all that support and all that responsibility to suddenly not being in the centre of things anymore. How does one feel about that? We thought you two might have at least a certain view on that. It's time to Radio Breakfast, talking things over, as we always do on a Tuesday with William Hague and Kezia Dugdale. I'm really interested in the psychology of this, because I was thinking about Rachel Reeves particularly. It's true of Keir Starmer, it's true of all these cabinet ministers, but Rachel Reeves, I feel, it really crystallised this notion to me, William, that yesterday she was incredibly powerful. She held the sort of fortunes of the nation in her hand. She would have had security. She had, I think, grace and favour property. You have drivers. You have all the grief and all the responsibility and all the power all crammed into your life. And then Tuesday morning happens and you got nothing left other than your backbench MP now. How difficult is that sort of transition, going from being the centre of things to no longer being the centre of things? I ask you, you can answer that theoretically or based on personal experience, if you like, William.
There are certain things. I mean, it's easier if you leave when you want to leave, like I did. Like Keith's skill in life is knowing when to get out or something. Yeah. But of course, but nevertheless, even if you've planned it yourself and it's not such a shock, it's still a big change. I mean, the old joke is you get in the back of your car and it doesn't set off. And also you pick up the phone and there's nobody at the other end. You actually start to have people's phone numbers, because of course, if you're a senior minister, all you have to do is phone the number 10 switchboard and say, put me through to the US secretary, put me through to the Prime Minister, and a couple of minutes later, there you are. You're speaking. You don't need anybody's phone number. So all of those things, there are those practical things that, of course, are an adjustment. But it's a really good, healthy thing about our democracy, that it works in this way, and that a lot of the people look at John Healey. He was out 6 weeks ago. Now he's back. That was
a clever resignation, wasn't it, in retrospect?
Little summer holiday.
You have to know when to get out. And in his case, it's straight back in again. So there is that shot, but there's also a total sense of liberation. Within a few weeks, you suddenly realise, well, the theatres are still open, and the pubs didn't close down while you were in office, and holidays are allowed without being criticised within 24 hours for going on holiday. And suddenly life opens up, and hopefully these on an individual basis, they've all got that to look forward to.
Yeah. So emptiness versus liberation, Kezia, is it a combination of the two?
It's total liberation, and it's come at a really good time. Just as William says, go on a holiday, turn off X, spend the summer thinking about what it is that you want to do next. What's the thing in your constituency? What's the thing in your life? What's the other job that you've wanted or you'd like to aspire to do? And she could do absolutely anything that she wants to. She could be an MP for another 20 years, or she can go off and do something completely different. The choices are entirely hers, and I wish her all the very best.
Well, that's all lovely and cuddly, isn't it? There is a golden rule in British politics that you both embody as well, that everyone becomes popular when they stop being politicians. And it's a funny old thing, that, isn't it? But it seems to be the case, and thank goodness for it. Thank you both, as ever. Kezia Dugdale, William Hague, always join us on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock to share their wisdom.